Welcome everyone to our AirWorks 2020 panel. Our panel is entitled Drones and Country of Origin Policy, a Frank Conversation. And this is obviously a very timely discussion, and given our panelists, it will be a very interesting and lively discussion. I just want to quickly say thank you again to AirWorks for having all of us and to making sure that we had this wonderful conversation this year virtually, although hopefully next year we'll all be together in person. So with that, let me start with panelist introductions. Kark, would you please kick us off?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. So my name is Kark Detweiler. I'm CEO and co-founder of Drone Amplified. We've been in business for a few years now. We have developed and sell a system that attaches to the bottom of a drone and allows you to do prescribed burns, so starting fires from the air. And also this is used a lot for back burns on wildfires. So about a quarter of all firefighting fatalities are related to aviation. And so our system is working to get those people out of the aircraft where they're flying low and slow in danger and to the sidelines where they can more effectively do their jobs.
Thanks. Carl, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny, and thanks, AirWorks, for having me. My name is Carl Szabo. I am Vice President and General Counsel for NetChoice. We're a trade association that promotes free expression and free enterprise. And I'm also an adjunct professor of internet law at the George Mason Antonin Scalia Law School.
Fantastic. Mark.
Hi, everyone. Mark Aiken. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for DJI and work a lot up on Capitol Hill and across the administration, looking at policy proposals that focus on anything from drone safety to really the topic that we're here all today to discuss around drone security and some other geopolitical issues.
Fantastic. And Suzanne.
Hi, thanks Jenny, and thanks to AirWorks for having me on the panel this year. Happy to be here. I'm Suzanne Lemieux. I'm the Manager of Emergency Response Policy and Operations Security at the American Petroleum Institute, and I'm the lead for all UAS work at API.
Great, thank you. And as I mentioned, I'm Jenny Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Drone Innovation. We're a DC-based organization that encompasses all of the leading manufacturers and innovators in the drone industry. So Carl, if we can kick it off with you today, can you tell us what is a country of origin ban and where did this originate as it relates to the drone industry?
Yeah, great question. It's a good way to really level set this whole conversation. What is country of origin ban? Now this is a term that gets used. It's not limited and wasn't invented for drones specifically. Now, country of origin ban is kind of what it sounds like. It says any products from country X are banned. They are either banned to be imported, they are banned from commercial use, they're banned from civilian use, or in a lot of the conversations we're going to have today, where they're banned for government procurement and use. And so a country of origin ban kind of in the world where I come from, kind of ignores the fundamental realities of the situation you're trying to address. In this case, it's a security concern. And in this case, it's a security concern with products coming from, well, mostly China. China, Iran often get thrown in together, as well as products from North Korea as well. Now, whether you want to have a conversation about whether you can trust products from those countries or not, I think when you're looking at kind of a country of origin basis, you sometimes ignore the bigger question is, what are the concerns that we're trying to address? Now, the country of origin bans that we've started to see percolate in the drone atmosphere, and I'll talk about some of the more recent activities on that in a moment, but they've been building over a while. And as I said, they didn't just start with drones. They started quite a while ago. Now, under the current administration, President Trump's taken a pretty tough line on China, something that's kind of new from a lot of prior administrations, whether it's whether their currency and business operations are legitimate or other types of questions. There was a trade embargo that was set to go into place about a year and a half ago that they were able to work through negotiations, and that didn't go through. And then it started emerging into the technology and security space, this kind of ongoing questioning and battle with China. And we saw it with a cellular company and a cellular manufacturer company called Huawei. And the Federal Communications Commission got involved, the White House got involved, and currently there are efforts to essentially strip out Huawei, which is a Chinese company's products, from American devices and American networks. Now, one of the things they did find with Huawei were security vulnerabilities, which is kind of the real problem, right? We're worried about the security of our data at the end of the day. Well, the actions against Huawei on security have kind of bled into this kind of tough on China rhetoric. And now you're seeing that attitude come into the drone atmosphere and the drone space. So back in September and October, you started to see introduction of legislation around drones and banning drones based on a country of origin basis. So in September, you saw Senator Scott here in Congress introduce S2502 for those of you playing at home, which is called the American Drone Security Act. And just this past March, it was marked up and moved out of committee. And there's a companion bill over in the House with about 12 co-sponsors. And you figure with a total body of several hundred, 12 co-sponsors is not a very big number to get. But then just after September, you got in October, the Drone Origin Enhancement Act, sorry, the Drone Origin Security Enhancement Act. And that was voted out of committee, and that was targeted at Russia, China, and North Korea. And likewise, it had 5 R's and 1 Democrat, and this is a House bill. So I'm curious to see where that goes. And more recently, we saw some efforts to inject drone security issues and drone bans into the National Defense Authorization Act, which is called NDAA for short. And the Senate decided not to take up an amendment that would ban the Department of Defense from using it. The House did incorporate that component. And then, of course, we have an act from the Department of Interior, this was several months ago, basically prohibiting the National Park Service from using drones for anything that's quote unquote non-emergency, which if you're worried about security purposes, really, that the use of them in emergency circumstances is where you might want to put your prohibition. That's what you're really worried about. But if you actually peel back the layers, you start to understand what the real intent is. Now, for example, in the Department of Interior, they said we're worried about security, technology, and American development and production. Now, that's really what this is getting at, maybe. This is less about security, and it's more about creating barriers to competition in the drone atmosphere so that we can give American businesses an assist. And from somebody who's kind of a free market, let the best technology win person, that kind of strikes me as wrong. So just kind of to summarize, the country of origin says, let's look at where it's based. But then it's ripe for political abuse, because right now we've only talked about really 3 or 4 countries, what, China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea. But if you actually look at the Department of National Intelligence, their worldwide threat assessment throws in many, many more countries, Syria, Venezuela, Yemen. So if the goal is to protect us from dangerous countries, then shouldn't those other countries be included? But if the real concern is addressing the security flaws, then the country of origin approach is really the wrong way to go. But you're going to instead need to look at what are the baseline security standards that we need for all drones, regardless of whether they're manufactured in Venezuela or Venice Beach. And that's kind of where we come from. And that's kind of what got this ball rolling, is this goal to base it on country of origin, not baseline security standards.
Thank you, Carl. That was just an incredible stage setter. Eric, I'm going to turn to you for your perspective on this pursuit of country of origin ban. Carl made some really interesting points about how this will impact basically the pipeline and competition and innovation, and would love to hear, you out in the field, not in Washington, D.C., what this means for someone like you, and whether, if you're using a drone that comes from a country that is on this country of origin ban, what that would mean for your business.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I think that, there's a lot of innovation happening in the United States, and a lot of it is really around, based on data processing and analytics, developing payloads like we're developing, to, do things that, just can't be done safely in any other way. And, I think we've seen in the past 15 years, a shift from the drones themselves being the key technology where there's innovation going on, to really it being the analytics and, payloads and platforms and what you're doing with them. That's where the innovation is. So, while, I think competition is great, and I would love to see lots more companies producing really top of the line drones. I think a lot of the innovation is actually leveraging these platforms now, and this is, taking away, some of the key, systems out there. And I think where it really trickles down is that, we're not just talking about banning, DJI in particular, it's all these Chinese components. And, we know that, almost all electronics are produced in China, or, a large percentage of them. So this isn't just, stifling the innovations of using the platforms that are built in China. It's actually about, now we have to be concerned about where is this particular chip coming from, or this circuit board or motor, which just makes it, adds a significant overhead. And, now there's just a lack of availability of parts that are, for those. And, I think this is really about, it's reducing our ability to innovate on those next things. So, if you wanted to revitalize the drone industry in the United States, or, level the playing field, or protect US manufacturing, that should have happened 15 or 20 years ago. Now it's really about, okay, now we've moved on. We're competing on, data analytics, payloads, applications in the drone space. And I think, that's where the focus should be. And I think, really, personally, I think instead of banning these types of technologies, really it should be more about investing locally, and investing to actually make sure that we stay on the cutting edge on these other aspects.
Thank you. Suzanne and Mark, please jump in.
I'll do. Go ahead, Suzanne. I'll back clean up here.
All right. I agree with Carrick's comments. And for us in the oil and gas industry, these are, a tool in the toolkit, and they should be used when appropriate. What we haven't seen is really a risk-based approach, which is what we feel is the most important way to implement a tool within our operations. Everything we do in oil and gas is risk-based. If you don't do a risk assessment, it can't be done because it's just not safe. You're dealing with, hazardous chemicals, flammable liquids. You really need that risk assessment. And so we've applied that across our industry. And this is where we see that too. We have standards in the oil and gas industry. API is a standard setting organization. And I agree with Carl that, yes, we need a baseline standard, which is going and kind of taking a cleaver where you should be using a scalpel to allow the market to continue. As with Carl, API's free markets is one of our foremost objectives. We are a global industry in a global supply chain. And so we really need to allow those markets to function. And when there is security concerns, we need those concerns shared with us as part of the user community. A lot of our members have clearances. We're very engaged in terms of cybersecurity threats. The energy sector is probably the second largest target of foreign actors in cyberspace. So we're very aware of these things, and we need that information shared with us so we can make those decisions based on risk.
Great point, Suzanne. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I mean, look, everyone here has really made some great points, but I'll, just to get a little bit granular on a couple of the country of origin proposals that we've been seeing. I think it's, Carl mentioned the Department of Interior Secretarial Order. I mean, whenever you start to really sort of peel back the layers of the onion there, and Carl got to this point too, the basis of the Secretarial Order was really about specific components and where they are made. And the reality of the drone industry today is, because of the way that that Secretarial Order was crafted, it wasn't just drones made in China, it was drones with Chinese-made components, which then grounded literally the entire Department of Interior drone fleet, of which DJI makes up only 18% of the current inventory, and 50% of what's in their inventory is actually made by an American manufacturer. So, right, again, it just sort of doesn't really add up to address the purported concerns that are being used to justify these sorts of tactics. And whenever you look up on Capitol Hill, I mean, the American Security Drone Act, I think, probably is the focal point for a lot of these conversations. And what we've been seeing across the debates with the National Defense Authorization Act, even there, I think what we saw is a couple of different iterations of amendments offered over in the House side as well as the Senate side. And the changes that we saw along the way just really were drastic from what was even just proposed 3 to 4 months ago. So again, it really does speak to the need to really understand the issues and to present the facts. And I think that's sort of what's getting lost in a lot of this, a lot of these conversations. I mean, at DJI, I think that we've probably faced the most scrutiny of any sort of drone company out there. But at the same time, it's really forced us to also, make sure that we have our house in order. And I mean, just look at, again, what the facts on the matter are. So the Department of Interior went through an extremely rigorous review of our government edition platforms before authorizing their approval, going so far as even to have the Department of Homeland Security, through its CISA, its Cyber Information Security Agency, perform a review at the Idaho National Lab in conjunction with NASA, as well as some other national security elements. You also had another prominent drone industry company, Precision Hawk, go out and set up its UAS Center of Excellence and work with Booz Allen Hamilton, who's probably arguably the leading cybersecurity expert across the private sector, perform its own cybersecurity audit of government edition platforms, as well as our Mavic 2 Enterprise platform on top of that. And the conclusions of all those reports were pretty unanimous that there wasn't this nefarious, intentional, or even unintentional data transfer or leakage going back to China or DJI. Again, there were very specific requirements and mitigation measures that we've seen, that we saw the Department of Interior really step out on a limb and be a pioneer of across the federal government for how they should institute a drone program responsibly. And I really think that that's something that needs to be injected into this conversation as a model that you should be able to take across the board, understanding that there probably are some sensitivities whenever you're looking at the national security elements of the government. But for every other non-national security element outside of DOI, including the Department of Commerce, U.S. Department of Agriculture, I mean, those types of missions that they're using drones for, I mean, there really are a lot of efficiencies that can be found, whether it's from a risk and safety side, also from a financial side. And those types of operations really have no inherent national security value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark. Carl, any thoughts?
Yeah, anybody who's picked up a newspaper in the past week knows that this issue is much more than just drones, right? You've seen this 6-letter word, TikTok, in the news a lot recently, and it's going through a similar debate. We've seen bills introduced and passed that is in the NDA, for example, that bans government military putting the app TikTok on a government device, as well as you saw it through an executive order, as well as anything else made by ByteDance, the company that owns TikTok. And why a lot of the justification has been because ByteDance is a Chinese company. It's this country of origin basis. Now, and we're seeing it with WeChat and many others. And look, a lot of these legislators, their hearts are in the right place. Their intentions are in the right place. But we know where the path of good intentions leads. And the fundamental problem is it's actually creating greater insecurity with these country of origin bases. And why is that? Well, okay, so I don't buy we'll stick with drones. I don't buy a drone from Russia. I don't buy a drone from Iran. I don't buy a drone from North Korea or China, or has any component from any of those 4 bad countries. Ipso facto, the drone that I buy is secure, right? Because the government has said, if you buy from these 4, they're insecure. So taking logic, then buying from any other country, it is secure. So if I buy my drone from, let's go back to Yemen or Venezuela, or, you know, Joe Kid in his basement, then presumably that drone is secure. And what that does is creates a false sense of security, not just for consumers, but for government procurement as well. Why? Because we haven't verified that these devices are actually secure. We've just verified that they are not from these 4 quote unquote bad countries. So you're creating expectations of security that don't exist. You're creating a false impression of security. Okay, so that's bad. And then we get to the question about, well, what do we do to spur American innovation of drones? So you heard from Carrick, one of the worst things you can do is prohibit the ability of an American drone manufacturer to take components from the least expensive places and put them together and sell you a drone. So that's bad. Second is, one of the best ways to spur innovation is to have clear standards in the marketplace, clear standards. So, you know, if I were to start a game of football and then suddenly halfway through the game, I start changing the rules, that's going to be terrible for both teams, right? You can't have the refs making up the rules as the game plays out. So that's really why this country of origin approach is not only bad for security, it's bad for American innovation. And so if we create clear baselines, clear standards, clear rules for everybody to play by, I don't care if you're in Russia, you're in Venezuela, or you're in a basement somewhere in Tallahassee, you're all playing by the same security rules. And that way we can make sure the devices are all secure, or the devices are insecure. And that's really what we need here.
And it's what's interesting, I think, about a couple of these proposals too, is it doesn't necessarily, the scopes aren't limited just to federal use and procurement. For a lot of them, what we're starting to see are, you know, potential handcuffs on the use of federal funds. So whenever you think of grant recipients, whenever you think of Title III education funding for colleges and universities that maybe have robust STEM programs or don't have robust STEM programs, whenever you look at first responders, AFG fire grants, COPS grants, you know, you're dealing with municipalities, cities, even tribal entities that are very limited in terms of the financial resources that they have at their disposal to get tools that literally save lives. And whenever, you know, you start looking at sort of the ripple effect of this, okay, so maybe, you know, it's sort of the least bad approach if it was just limited to, you know, federal procurement, but that's not what we're dealing with here, right? And a lot of times, and I think probably for Suzanne in your constituency, you know, whatever the federal government does, that's usually a pretty good cue for like a very highly regulated space like the oil and gas industry. So obviously, you know, I think that the ramifications across commercial and enterprise customers, that's much more far-reaching, right, than just what the intended proposal for, you know, for the American Secure Drone Act, even the draft executive order, which even goes so far as, you know, looking at the overflight of any what they call covered drone because it has a Chinese-made component, trying to prohibit, you know, the use of the national airspace system. So again, there are a lot of slippery slopes that I think that these sorts of proposals really shine the light on, or don't shine the light on, and people unfortunately are probably going to go down that slope if people don't actually, you know, take a moment, catch their breath, and look at this from a sound policy perspective.
Yeah, Mark, I would just
go ahead, Suzanne.
On 2 points. In the oil and gas industry, we have a tremendous amount of leased federal lands that we're operating on, and so if it's prohibited. If BLM lands are prohibited, then that limits our ability to use these systems. These are very remote areas. They're not inhabited largely. You know, where's the risk? And so why are we prohibited if there's no risk present? We're just doing overflights, inspections, things of that nature. You're removing someone driving miles and miles, you know, out in the middle of nowhere. You're using the system that's much more efficient and it's frankly safer. On the other side, as you said, with the government, if the government says these aren't safe and the private sector continues to use them, that's a reputational risk and potentially a liability that you're putting out there that people are going to question. We already get a lot of questions about our ability to operate safely in the oil and gas industry. And so we don't want to add anything in there that could cause people to doubt that we're doing this thing as safely as we can.
Suzanne, those are really, really great points. If you wouldn't mind just taking us a little bit further into how a country of origin ban, you talked about how you are surveying on federal property, and Mark talked about a slippery slope. Obviously, there have been a tremendous amount of investment in drones, and possibly DJI drones or other drones that are made in any of these countries that would be on a ban list. What does that mean for your companies after you have gone through training and investment? And Mark, I would love for you to jump in too, and Carrick, because obviously DJI spent a lot of time and money in working with the Department of the Interior only to see this program get shut down. So I'll turn it over to you all to take it from here.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so our companies are certainly using DJI drones. There's 75 to 80% of the commercial market. Obviously, they're common. It's almost ubiquitous when people are using drones. So it's a huge investment that companies have been making. They're trying to mature their programs. They've trained their pilots, or they're using third parties. So we don't want to see, a wholesale limitation of foreign-made drones, let alone DJI drones. We are in a globalized market. Whether you can say that's not the best thing, but that's where we are. And we're getting components from all over the world, but a lot from Asia, because that's just the nature of manufacturing and technological development and all kinds of, systemic issues around the globe. And so we want to see, as I said, a risk-based approach to, when is the right time to use these systems? What's the type of analysis that needs to be done to even understand where these components come from? And what are the risks involved with those? We're seeing this not only in the drone space, but in the electric power space. There was an executive order back on May 1st looking at the bulk power system. And I think it's not similar to this issue with drones. They're looking at a narrow band of users, but ignoring the fact that this equipment is used by industrial users across the country. And so we say, well, I'm only concerned about the electric, power transmission part. But if I'm using those systems within my operations, should I be concerned? I haven't been given any intelligence that says that it's not safe, but you're telling me it's unsafe because it's from this particular country. So there's a lot of things there that are just very political that we're trying to kind of wade through and understand while doing these things safely. And so because we've made investments, because we take a risk-based approach to things, we want to see that reflected in any legislation that comes out. And so far, I don't think that dialogue has really been open with the community of users.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Carrick, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that like Mark and Carl were talking about as well is just the uncertainty in all of this situation. So there were rumors that the DOI ban was going to happen, and then there were rumors that it's going to be a government-wide ban shortly after. These bills will pass, and here we are almost a year later, still with this uncertainty hanging over us. And I think this is really the killer. So we worked with Department of Interior for 6 months looking at various drone platforms that could carry our ignition payload. And after analyzing from multiple many different dimensions, including not just payload capabilities, price, flight time, security was one of those factors. They settled on the DJI M600, which is what we then designed our payload around to integrate with. And then to get the rug pulled out from under us to say, oh, sorry, you can't use these. But maybe you can still use them in some places. And now so states are still purchasing our system and using it, but now they say, okay, well, if I can't use it on federal fires that just happen to cross from our state lands into the federal lands, now what do? Do we have to ground our fleet for that purpose? So this uncertainty is just really, I think, the biggest challenge here. And maybe that's part of keeping everyone on their toes or something, but is really hurting, American companies like Drone Amplified, where we, have spent many weeks and months, trying to figure out, what's happening, what the solution is. And then I guess the other thing I'll say is that, this isn't just focused on the government, as Suzanne was saying. This is really going to trickle down into many areas. So, Drone Amplified, we started out at the University of Nebraska, and the executive order that might come out, or some of these laws that have been proposed, would prohibit grant funding that are flowing through USDA, NSF, Department of Energy, all of these federal agencies that fund a lot of the key research in the United States from using these platforms. And just to give you a sense, if you go from being able to buy a $5,000 drone to having to pay $20,000 for something equivalent, that means there's like one less Nebraskan, because I'm in Nebraska, who is being paid to help develop this new technology as part of their education. So that's a serious impact on our country.
Thank you. Mark and Carl, any thoughts on this part of our discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it just, sort of echoing again, points that Carl just made and others. I think it really boils down to, the unintended consequences of all of this. I mean, do we really want to, if to sort of take the point that Carl made earlier, if this is really about trying to spur American innovation in a space, right? I would think the last thing in the world that we would want to do is take away, federal research dollars for folks like Karik and others, right, to even pursue a career or develop a technology at a university level, to really provide that seed dollars to allow for, American innovation to continue to thrive. I mean, look, working for DJI, I mean, I can't help but, speak to, part of the success to DJI, which is it's all about the vertical integration, right? It's about going from research and development all the way through manufacturing capabilities. And that was a very specific investment that DJI made. Now, as I think it's sort of been pointed out, I guess we sort of felt as though we knew the rules of the road, or the rules for engagement in the free marketplace. But now, because there's this perception that, oh, well, you guys couldn't have done this, on a level playing field. It's like, so now we get penalized. So I guess it's just, for me in particular, especially speaking with legislative staff and officials inside the administration, I would almost prefer for them to come out and just, say specifically why they're doing this and not use sort of the facade of national security. Because again, time and time, we get pressed on this, and we continue to put the facts forward through evidence-based research through third parties. And it's like, those don't matter anymore. So it does become disheartening whenever you hear stories like, from Karik and others, that really the uncertainty in the marketplace and people, making business decisions on a bill that's been introduced, of which there's thousands of bills introduced each year, and making business decisions on that, because some are saying, well, that we know that that's going to happen, but nobody really knows what's going to happen in Congress. I mean, we're coming into an election, and, it's 6 1/2 pick them on the other side. So it's just, we really do, I think, need to try and put this behind us, but to do it in the right way. And I think sort of with, some of the solutions that other industries have looked at, risk-based approaches, looking at standards. I mean, look, the drone industry is very familiar with industry consensus standards. We just came out of a very long process looking at industry consensus standards for remote identification, which hopefully, the FAA will acknowledge in its final rulemaking for its UAS remote identification rule later this year. So, this industry it's whenever a challenge has been put before us, we've really been able, I think, to bootstrap this and work in a timely fashion to address the real concerns.
Yeah. Carl, Mark touched on a couple of points that you've already made, but I I think it would be great for you to kind of tie this up. And obviously this is so interesting to hear from Kark's perspective about how this trickles down to actually hurt American innovation and our ability to compete from the US. So tell us more about this and from your perspective.
Yeah, so look, I deal with lawmakers all the time, and oftentimes legislation is they read something in the newspaper and think, oh, there should be a law for that. And sometimes there is a need. I do think we need security standards, but do we need legislation like the ones we're seeing right now? Well, look, I have the tendency to keep buying the same shirts, same dress shirts. I'm addicted to the same dress shirt. And every time I do, my wife looks at me and says, Carl, before you order that, go see if you have it in your closet. Go see if there's something in there that can maybe solve the shirt problem that you see. And so more often than not, I'll open the door and say, oh, I have that exact shirt. It's right there. We have government agencies specifically designed to address these types of problems. One is the Consumer Product Safety Commission, CPSC. It is this little known commission you never hear much about, but they're governed by industry self-regs. And if industry were to essentially promulgate industry security standards, CPSC can analyze it, see if it's compliant, and then kind of say, if you comply by this, go for it. We have the Federal Trade Commission, and they address deceptive trade practices. So if a drone manufacturer, for example, promises that your data will stay on your data and will not go back to the Ayatollah in Iran or into Shanghai or something like that, and they violate that promise, the Federal Trade Commission can take an action right now, today. We don't need any congressional action created. So that's kind of the good news is, even if we don't have legislation, there are actions our government can take today if any drone manufacturer creates a device that's unsafe, and that would be security standards, or promises to maintain a certain degree of security and violates that promise. Another concern that I have, kind of as somebody who lives, no pun intended, at 10,000 feet oftentimes, is kind of the slippery slope from, okay, so telecommunications, drones, now we're seeing it with mobile apps. Well, how long till we start seeing sectorally based security accusations based on a country of origin designed just to eliminate competition? So what if, for example, Sony lobbyists for Sony went in and said, you must prohibit all TVs sold from South Korea because they're too close to North Korea? Well, yeah, that would wipe away a lot of competition in the market for Sony, and that would be great for them. And they could say, oh, this will be great for security and yada, yada. That's kind of the slippery slope that we've seen going on here. So this is much bigger than drones. It's much bigger than apps. We're talking about essentially weaponizing the threat of security for competition prevention. The kind of closing thoughts that I'll leave you to kind of tie this all up is, and Carrick, you know, you're kind of the poster child of this. And I use my football game analogy. Carrick, you started the game. You read the rule book. You said, okay, well, if I do A, B, and C according to the FAA, I can play. I can be on the field. I'm ready to go. I did all my testing. And then suddenly somebody says, oh no, we decided to rewrite the rules and now you can't compete. That's just unfair. That is fundamentally unfair. And even if you don't care about fairness, then you need to at least care about the ability for private entrepreneurs to be able to enter a market and compete. And you do that by having clear standards and clear rules of the road that can't just be rewritten at the 11th hour. So that's kind of where we come from. If you can't tell by my remarks, country of origin, I don't think it's the right approach. Let's get some baseline security standards. I think they could be useful. I think they are needed, and they will actually solve the real problem that we see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Carl. And to all of you, this really puts this discussion into perspective. I think this brings us to our next discussion question, which is, should the government be in the business of making policy like this? we've seen a lot of moves by the current administration that are veering towards protectionism. How is that overshadowing this industry, and how is that causing you to, especially Carrick and Suzanne, for your companies, pause in making investments or pursuing, let's say, government contracts or other things? And what could the government be doing better? What do they need to know from you before they continue down this path?
Sure, thanks. I think that this is not something new for the oil and gas industry. This has really started at the beginning of the Trump administration with the tariffs on steel, which, to Carl's point, were particularly to protectionist measures to develop better manufacturing capacity in the US. And because of the amount of infrastructure that we build in the oil and gas that uses steel, but very specific types of steel that aren't produced in the US, there was already a kind of optimized global supply chain that our members were participating in. A lot of steel manufacturing has moved to Mexico. That became wrapped up in all of this. And we've been fighting this fight for a couple of years now. So this isn't necessarily a new approach by the administration for us at all, but a troubling one, but not new. So in terms of drones, we would really like to see the community come together rather than the legislators come together to create some standards. In the oil and gas industry, as I said, API is a standard setting organization. We have only over 400 standards incorporated by reference into regulation. So we see standards as a key piece of how the industry can be comfortable. And then you, in that standard setting process, you engage your federal partners so that they can weigh in, and then they're comfortable with the end result and they adopt that without having to write something kind of in a vacuum where they may not really understand the user community, understand the developer, understand the manufacturers. So that's something I think that we would like to see moving forward. At the FAA, we've seen just I think everyone can agree, even people at the FAA, just a slow and really painful roll on regulations that just, even once remote ID comes out and we don't know when that's going to be, it's a 36-month implementation. I mean, you're years stifling innovation and the ability to use some of these systems as effectively as we think we can. And so as far as the administration's policies and how they're working with Congress, I think there's just some kind of fear mongering a little bit that's happening, where you have the administration talking about national security, you have some lawmakers getting briefed and getting a little bit worked up about some of these things, where if they actually talk to the users and understood when risk is identified, when mitigations could be put in place, that it's not just a flat risk with no compensation for that risk. It's those conversations that I think need to happen more. I know Mark in his role tries. We've tried to go up on the Hill and educate some people, but when you have 20 minutes, it's a little bit hard for nuance to come into those conversations. But certainly we think that, normal order and then a process of engagement with stakeholders is critical.
Mm-hmm. Carrick?
Yeah, so I'll just add. I think that, the government should not be regulating at this level, and I think that certainly there's a pretty compelling argument that China has engaged in unfair trade practices or propping up some of their sectors, and I think, as Carl pointed out, there are mechanisms that could be used already to address some of these issues. But I think the thing that really, let's assume we want to engage in some protectionist measures. I think the problem is that right now the administration is targeting kind of old technologies. So really, if you want to be engaging in this, you should be, looking at what's next and what's going to, where the United States can really maintain its advantage, whether it's in, new types of manufacturing or technology or other things. And I think, so I think these protectionist measures are not good. And, we're just going to create a trade war where there'll be back and forth retributions. So if we're going to do this, though, we should be focusing on new technologies and not just, basically taking out all the building blocks that, we use as, small companies and big companies use these things from China and elsewhere that we want to be able to get at competitive prices and, with the global availability.
Right, right. Mark and Carl, before you all jump in, I think that this is really putting into perspective some points that were made. Suzanne, I know, talked about how this is really a political, become a political issue, or it has been made into a political issue. And Carl, you talked about the false sense of security that a country of origin ban creates. And so putting these two things together, Mark and Carl, Mark, you're on the Hill all the time talking to folks. How hard is it to push back on this now?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're midway through August. We're about 80 days out of a major presidential election, so everybody's in full campaign mode. The rhetoric, is really hard to decipher at this point from what you would consider, fact-based news. So it's a difficult conversation. And, not to shy away from the elephant in the room. I mean, DJI is a Chinese company. So, it's very clear that many, even on both sides of the aisle, are looking at, trying to sort of one up the other person on, who's strongest, against China during this time. And so, the politics of what we're discussing tend to, not allow for the facts to really have an impact on the conversation. But, to the points made earlier in terms of, there really isn't a need for new legislation on this. If you were able to sort of look at the convening factors that or authorities rather that the government already has, I mean, like this, Carl and I got to know each other a few years back. During our engagement at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, because there was a mandate for NTIA to convene multi-stakeholders to address privacy, transparency, and accountability for the use of drones, right? And I mean, so we all got in the room over a summer. What was that called? About a 9-month endeavor, I think, that we, really slogged it out. But, it culminated in best practices that the industry worked, with federal stakeholders. You have other elements of the government, like the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, right? It's there in their name. That's what these folks do for a living. And I really don't think that we're trying to reinvent the wheel here. I mean, it's drones today, and it's going to be smartphones the next day, or it's going to be televisions, as with the analogy that Carl used. But I also think too that, what we're not keeping in perspective is, for the broader aviation industry, right? I mean, unmanned drones are defined as unmanned aircraft systems. So a lot of the broader aerospace and aviation sector use some sort of technology, whether it's avionics or other even hardware that's made in China. So, while we're focusing on drones today, this is sort of the issue that we looked at or have been looking at over the years as it pertains to federal sovereignty of the airspace. If you start looking at, giving up federal authority to regulate drones in these altitudes, our municipalities, localities, tribal governments, are they going to stop it just looking at regulating drones? Right. So again, there are a lot of things here that I think that need to put in perspective. But I'm hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist whenever it comes to really how our government should function, especially Capitol Hill, and having been up on Capitol Hill for almost 10 years and seeing the sausage making there. I like to think that, as not just DJIs, we continue to press forward. I mean, I think you all, know my colleague, Brendan Schulman, and the work that he's done over the years before I came to DJI, and my other colleague, Jordan Gross. I mean, we're passionate about this. And we really are hopeful that, that the facts will matter in this debate, and we'll overcome and we'll be able to address this. So, I guess this is sort of my calling card for folks to really get engaged. Folks like Suzanne and Karik and Carl, drones aren't their day-to-day business. Like, I mean, they're actually, well, maybe not Carl, but Suzanne and Karik, I mean, these guys are on the ground, literally, they have constituencies that are really providing a ton of value to the American economy. And the thought leadership that Carl and his team over at NetChoice have provided in many technology spaces is sorely needed at this moment. So, as sort of as our audience, listens in here, I think it's really incumbent on them to get engaged on this, right? To let them know, like, hey, like, drones matter to me. I might just be a small LLC that is, doing hourly photography or videography using drones. But at some point, they might run into a sticky situation that, hey, this real estate company that asked for me to sort of take some aerial photography is adjacent to federally managed lands by the U.S. Post Office, right? And so if there's something there that says I can't fly over federal lands, well, oh boy, like, I really got to understand those lines in the sky to prevent, me from flying over that. So I just, I want to just sort of leave our folks, with sort of that thought that our legislators really do need to hear from them on this issue because, as everyone on the panel here knows, and especially you, Jenny, and the work that you've done with the Alliance for Drone Innovation, I mean, we are at no shortage of these country of origin proposals. And it seems like they just seem to snowball almost on a weekly basis to where, they're still proposals, but people are really, really starting to take that guidance and almost implement it as policy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Carl, Mark referred to you, so I'm going to turn to you to pick it up.
Yeah, there's a sign outside the National Archives, a phrase I've always loved, what is past is prologue. We've had these discussions before. We had them about 20 years ago, except instead of the country being China, it was actually their neighbor to the east, Japan, where there was a huge fear in America that Japanese innovation would overtake American exceptionalism. And, you got Michael Crichton writing the book Rising Sun, for example. And it turned out not to be the case. Apparently, America was able to, its ingenuity, its free market nature, was able to overcome challenges from foreign competitors. And that's kind of when I go on the Hill, and that's kind of where I believe that, look, if we truly believe in American exceptionalism, which seems to be a lot of the basis for some of this anti-China legislation, quite frankly, then you just don't have trust in America. If you don't trust us to have the best product, make the best decisions for what we want for our systems, whether it's checking an oil rig or it is checking a telephone line with a drone or delivering a payload, then you've got a more fundamental problem. Now, looking to things that Congress could do, look, we've delegated the idea of industry self-reg previously. We did on something very important, children's privacy. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act basically says to the Federal Trade Commission, look, if an industry self-reg comes forward with standards, you, the Federal Trade Commission, the federal government can look at it and say, oh, if you comply by these standards, you'll be good. And basically the industry self-regulatory basis model is able to evaluate and adapt, not at the speed of legislation, but the speed of technology, because who knows what technology may be coming down the pike that will impact drones and their security capabilities. And we can't wait for Congress. They pass, what, 160 bills a year to maybe get to it? No, we need industry to be able to do for itself what it does best. So that's kind of where I come from. That's kind of my pitch. And, to those watching, I think Mark's absolutely right. They need to hear from you. They need to know that you care about this issue, because as much as my going to the Hill and talking about it to legislators, they care, but not really. What they really do care about is when they get a stack of letters from constituents saying, don't do this, or don't deny me my ability to earn a living, or hire new employees and stuff like that. That's what matters. What I have to say at the end of the day, they don't care, because I don't vote for them. Y'all do. And so that's really the most important thing. Get out there, pound the pavement, write a letter. You think it doesn't matter, but it really does.
It absolutely does. And I can tell the audience firsthand in my experience when I was in government, especially in the federal government as a decision maker, when those letters and phone calls came in, they really helped tip the scale. And being engaged and active, and we encourage our members at ADI to get involved. Suzanne, Tarek, because we're almost at time, just some closing thoughts from the two of you. why our audience should get engaged, why they should care about this type of policy, and then we'll conclude.
Thanks, Jenny. I would just say that to echo Carl's points and Mark's, you do have to get engaged because it's the constituents that should be driving any type of legislative or regulatory activity. And so is this needed? Probably not, in my opinion. And so we want to make sure we're engaged. We want to represent our members and what their uses are. And again, it's what is the risk? And let's have a conversation about risk and mitigation. There's lots of things that we can do, and there's lots of conversations that we should have. And we should be able to have those fact-based, science-based conversations as a user group, and not this, because if they do it here, we've seen, and it's not just in this administration, we've seen this in other administrations, in the oil and gas industry's facts and science is questioned constantly. So it's not a new issue for us either. But we really want to have a reasonable fact-based conversation in the development of any type of regulation. And so you want to get engaged to drive that point home, that it's important that everyone's uses and mitigations and concerns are considered and thought through, and it's not just a blanket denial that doesn't take any of those things into account.
Tarek, I'm going to turn to you for the final comment.
Yeah, so I just agree. I mean, engagement is critical. This is really where we can, innovate by developing new technologies. And I think that by, making our supply chain more difficult by banning, or potentially banning a lot of these products, we put ourselves at a disadvantage. And I think that we can really, continue to innovate as we have for decades and generations. And, if this is about competition, we can outcompete if we're given, the resources and the, area to work with. And really, I do think that, this is gonna come back to bite us if we really are starting a trade war, because it's not going to be too long before, the EU says, okay, well, we can't buy US drones now, or, this will propagate. And I think that's a very slippery slope. So I think it's important to, think about the long term as well, and talk to your, senators and really convey your ideas on this.
Thank you. And all of the panelists, this was just an incredible and very frank discussion. I'm sure our audience appreciated your comments and thoughts and perspective. I'm just going to wrap this up by saying thank you to the panelists. Thank you to AirWorks for having all of us, and everyone be well, and thank you, and hopefully we'll see you next year in person. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jenny.